Hey now, today we're going to take a look at Ars Alchimia from Manifest Destiny and Japan brand. This is another one of these obscure Japanese games that I think I'm becoming known for reviewing, but this one, it's almost possible to find right now. It will be at Essen this year, 2014. After that, who knows? Maybe it'll get picked up by another publisher, like a North American or European publisher. Maybe not. It remains to be seen. But I'll tell you a little bit about the game. This is a worker placement game. It's where I would say that it's falls on the lighter side of worker placement, and it's also mixing alchemy. You're trying to go to different locations, gather resources, then get work orders, fulfill those orders, and create items for your clients. Of course, when you do this, you're going to get victory points. There's some other little bells and whistles as well, like you're going to get assistants to help you out. You have to go to certain forges in order to make all these items together, and you get different bonuses depending on which forge you can go to, and it can be easier or harder depending on which forge you go to. And also, it's very easy to bump people out of spaces in this game. I'm not going to say too much more here, so let's go to the brief overview of the game, and then we're going to come back. I'll let you know what I think. Okay, I'm going to give you a brief overview of Ars Alchimia. This is a worker placement game and a competitive game at that for 3 to 4 players. You have to have at least 3 players. The goal is to have the most points by the end of 4 rounds of play, which each represents a year in game time, although that kind of doesn't matter. So this is a typical setup of the game. Each player is going to have their own player board where you have, you can keep track of all the different resources you have. So you have little cubes here representing like leaves, snow, fire, sand, and elixirs. Elixirs being a wild resource, although some orders specifically require that you use elixir and nothing else. Then you have these order cards out here. And by the way, every card that's face up on the board right now is going to get wiped away if it's not taken at the end of the round, and new cards will come out. So you have the order cards here. They're in 3 different ranks, A, B, and C. You have C ranks, which are the lowest, and then the B ranks, and then the A ranks, so there's less of each one. Now, we'll get to that in a minute. You have location cards up here. You'll have 3 face up, randomly drawn. Then you'll have the face down stack. Same thing with the forges. You'll have 2 face up and then the face down stack, and then the 3 assistants. Now, for all of these different cards, the location cards and the forges are going to stay out during play, meaning that those are locations you can go to with your workers, and they're not going to get shuffled away until the end of the rounds. But whenever someone takes an assistant or takes a order, it's going to immediately be replenished from the deck, so you'll constantly be cycling through this. So everyone's going to get a certain amount of workers depending on the number of players. I think everyone still starts off with 9, and then you may have the potential to get more workers. They say put them in the lid of the box, signifying that they're still in play, but you're not going to be able to gain them until later. And then you're going to begin. You also have a die here, which you'll use for some random perfection rolls. And at the top of your player board is where you keep your orders. You can only have 3 orders at a time. And you can't like willingly get rid of them. You have to fulfill them, or you're stuck with them unless you have a special assistant that lets you do that. So first thing you do is determine player order. In the first round, it's going to be random. From then on, it's going to be whoever has the least amount of points who gets to take the card first. The reason for this is not only the turn order, 1, 2, 3, or 4, but all depending on the number of players, but also if you go further back in turn order, you're actually going to get more workers, which you'll immediately take from the stock of available workers, depending on the number of players again. And then you'll get to use them right away, and they'll stick around at the end of the round. They don't go back into the box. Now, whoever has, once you've done all that, determine turn order, get your workers. If you have assistance from a previous round, you have to pay a worker into the town square, which is kind of like the null area, at the beginning of the round. Then you're going to begin. When it's your turn, very simply, as with any other worker placement game, you're going to put a worker in a spot. It's kind of hard to see, but there are little rectangles next to every spot you can go to. So these 3 assistant cards, and every one of the orders has a spot, every one of the locations, and the decks for the forges and locations have a spot as well. When you go on that spot, if it's a order card, you're simply going to take it if you have room available, put it on your board, and that's it. Same thing with assistants. You'll take an assistant and you'll immediately have access to it. So let's go ahead and take a look at these kind of cards. On the order cards, up at the top, the big number is the number of points that you're going to immediately get when you fulfill this order. You'll move your little scoring marker up, move it around the track. In the opposite corner here is a little type for the order. This is going to be important because, first off, you cannot fulfill orders greater than A unless you complete orders that have this academic symbol in the top. Once you've completed one of those, you're able to move on to rank B orders. Once you've completed 2 of those, you can move on to the rank A orders. But in the beginning, you're kind of stuck with the green cards. And also, the type matters because during endgame scoring, the more cards you have of a certain type, the more points that you're going to get. Here's the name, and then you have the all the different resources you need in order to fulfill this order. So this one needs 1 earth and 2 of the snowflakes. We'll take a look. They get more difficult as you progress through it. So this is a B rank order. You get 7 points, but it costs you 3 snow and 2 fire. And then speaking of fire, you have Prometheus' fire, which costs you 4 fire in order to build it, but you do get 11 points. So that's how orders work. As soon as you take one, it's immediately going to be replenished. The assistants, these are going to give you a bonus right away, and like I said, you have to pay upkeep during the future rounds, but they're either going to give you a constant bonus or perhaps a once per turn or once per round bonus. Investigating Fairy says that when you gather or transmute at random, draw 2 cards and choose one, put the other below the pile. This one here says that when you gather perfectly, you gain an extra primal fire, which is the red resource. And the Golden Beast here says that when you gather perfectly, you change one of your acquired resources into an elixir, which is the wild. Now, when you go to one of these spots, you take the card, replenish immediately, voila, you're done. Then we have the locations. Locations. When you go there, you're going to put your worker up in the top rectangle. You're going to immediately gain the 2 resources above the box at the bottom. So if I went to the Lighthouse of Amaroth, I'm going to immediately get a green and a blue resource. But then I can roll the die. And when I roll the die, I'm going to, if I get a 5 or higher, I'm going to get this red resource as well. There's a little more to do with that, but I'll get back to that in a minute. Now, if I don't want to get one of these face-up locations, I can instead go to the deck location. When I do that, I'm just going to randomly flip over the top of the deck, and that is the location I'm going to. And I resolve it the same way as I do the other face-up locations, but at the end, no matter what happens, I'm going to take that and put it underneath the bottom of the deck. All right, and whenever I clear cards at the end of the round, you're going to shuffle the face-up locations and put them under the bottom of the deck as well, so you're constantly going to new locations. The forges are where I'm actually going to be able to fulfill my orders and potentially make elixirs as well. Now, each one of the forges is going to give you a certain amount of transmutations. That's what these little potion symbols are. So the Witch Cauldron here is going to give you 2 opportunities to transmute. You can use either of these transmutations to do either or make elixirs or to actually fulfill an order. If you want to make an elixir, you just have to move 2 resources of any 2 different types down on your player board and then move your elixir up 1. Congratulations, you've made a wild elixir. If you want to fulfill an order, you simply take one of the existing orders that you may have, look at whatever resources you need, move them down on the track, and then put it off to the side, score the points. You're good to go. Now, you can also choose to gather perfectly, which is, or I'm sorry, to transmute perfectly, which is to say you roll the die, hope to get whatever the number is that's pictured, and it may change depending on the cauldron, and then you may get extra points depending on what you're trying to do. If you only have to roll once, even if you do multiple transmutations of different types. Every time, if you do this perfectly, whenever you get elixirs, you get a bonus point on the track. If you fulfill an order and you do it perfectly, it's very tiny, but down here at the bottom it will tell you that for a rank A order, you're going to get plus 3 points. For a rank B, you get plus 2 points. And for a rank C, you get plus 1 point. And that's pretty much it. Those are all the different locations. Oh, I'm sorry. You can actually go to, much like with the locations, you can also randomly take a forge off the top. See, this is an example of one that has a lot of different transmutation spots. And then you'll shove it on the bottom just as you would with the locations. Now, let's talk a little more about worker placement and the perfect transmuting and gathering. Now, I mentioned before that if you want to take a spot, all you need to do is put your worker there, and you can do whatever it is. Take a card, gather resources, transmute, so on and so forth. But what happens if there's already someone there, including yourself, at a spot? If it was a normal worker placement game, you just wouldn't be able to take the action until everything resets. In this game, however, you can still take that action, but you have to pay for it. You need to put down a number of workers equal to the amount of workers already there, plus at least 1. So let's say that yellow had already gone to this particular spot, taken this card, it got replaced by another order, and I really want that order. I don't care about the other ones that are out here, I want that order. I can do it, but now I need to put 2 workers there, and then the workers that were already there go into the town square, which is like the null void for the rest of the round. It's the same thing for all the other spots as well. I just have to pay more and more, but it's a little bit different for the locations and for the forges, because there you have that die roll that you do in order to either transmute or gather perfectly, right? Well, if I want to really ensure that I can get those special gather perfectly and transmute perfectly bonuses, I can put more than the required number of workers there. So even if the spots are empty, I can say, well, I can just do this for 1, but I really want to gather perfectly. So I'm going to put 3 there. That means that for every extra worker I put there up and above the minimum I need, I get to get plus 1 bonus to my die roll. If I was already there with those 3, and then red wants to go there and also wants a bonus, he would have to put at least 4, and then as many more as he wants for the bonus. So let's say 6. And then all of mine are immediately going to get moved to the square. They'll drop their workers here, their bowling pins, so they roll, and it's really hard to get them to stand up. And then he gets to gather the resources as normal, plus gets a significant bonus to his die roll to gather perfectly. Same thing for the secret decks as well. You decide ahead of time before you see the card whether or not you're going to try to give yourself a bonus by putting more and more workers there. And of course, the other benefit of this is that it makes it even more difficult and more expensive for the other players to go to that spot again, because now they have to pay even more workers than they normally would have had to. So that's kind of the trick of the game. It's worker placement, but you can easily bump people if you're willing to pay for it. And that's really the game. You're going to go around trying to get orders, getting orders easily, but then trying to fulfill them by gaining as many resources as possible from the locations, getting assistants to help you out with that, or to help you out with getting actually transmuting all of those orders into points. That is Ars Alchimia. Presentation-wise, I like the artwork of Ars Alchimia. I like the art on the box. I like the little chibi art on the assistant cards. And I think that the board, as small as it may be, looks really, really cool with the little vintage-looking town, little homely town. I don't know how else to say it, but I like all that a lot. I don't think it's everyone's cup of tea because I know some people just hate anime-style artwork, but for me, it works pretty well. Being an international version of the game, the text is very small on the cards, but it kind of has to be in order to be more accessible to people from Japan and who speak English. So there's that. As far as like the actual components, you know, I wish there was more dice in the game, just because, I mean, it's easy. I just went and grabbed more 6-sided die, but that would have been a cool little feature to add to the game, is more of those, and maybe not the tiny dice. Also, the bowling pin meeples that we use for the workers, they're okay. They're certainly better than like little cardboard chits or anything like that, but they do roll around a lot. They're a little annoying. Again, this is one of those games that is like screaming for a deluxe edition with really cool alchemical miniatures, like little homunculi or something. That'd be awesome, but whatever. If you want to pip out your game, I'm sure you could do that. The box is also a little bit too small to keep everything in there comfortably. You have to like really, I just like the game came packaged to me, I kept all the meeples and dice and markers in the same bag, and the cubes in the same bag, and which means you kind of have to flatten it out in order to close the box, but that's a little nitpicky. So the presentation's okay. As far as the gameplay, this is a very light worker placement game. I can't emphasize that enough. Not that it's like super simple. I mean, it's going to take you at least a few minutes to figure out what's going on. But once you do, I mean, it's very, very easy. Like, if this is one spectrum of worker placement compared to, like, I don't know, Kalis or Archon, Glory and Machination, where there's just dozens of things you can do out on the board. And this one, you really only have, what, 4 main areas? And you have different options of what you do there, but it's really, really straightforward. And this is actually one of those games where it says 100 minutes on the box. If you play with 4 players and it's your first time, yeah. But if you play with 3 or 4 players who you're familiar with the game, this can be done in an hour. This is one of those very rare instances where the publisher has overestimated how much time you need on an average basis, I would say. This is very, very straightforward, and the turns go quickly because there's just not a ton of different decisions and paths that you have to worry about to get to victory. Now, it might sound like I'm trashing the game a bit, but really, I think that you have to take this game for what it is, and that it is a great gateway game into bigger, more grandiose worker placement games. But having said that, there's still a few neat, innovative things that this one does that makes it, you know, while it's still very light and very gateway, entry-level friendly, it still might be worth it for people who are more experienced to check out. I like the idea of the constantly randomized locations of the forages, the location cards, the assistants, things like that. So there's always something new every round, even though there are only 4 rounds, which really feels like a tight time constraint. And I also like the idea that if you don't like one of the face-up cards that there is for the locations and forages, you can just take your random shot at getting a card that might be more useful to you from the deck of many things. But you don't know. I mean, but at the end, especially at the end of the game when you're just trying to get as many points as possible, going there might be your only saving grace. The only thing that's going to get you the points that you need. You just have to take a random shot, especially because workers are in such short supply. And that's another thing that this game does that I personally have not seen in other games. I'm sure there might be some other worker placement game that's done this, but the ability to, or I should say that there are, you know, just like in any worker placement game, there's limited spaces, but you can easily bump someone out of a space and take it for yourself if you're willing to pay for it. And therefore that leads to interesting things where you may pay, especially at the end of a round where you think you may not have any other plays, putting more and more workers in that spot, not just to have a chance of getting the perfection bonus, but also just to keep someone from being able to take that space after you, totally screwing them over. That's the little bit of player interaction in the game that I think is kind of neat and innovative. And going for that perfection bonus is a cool thing as well. It's like, okay, look, I have this random dice roll. I could try to lock it in and ensure that I get the bonus as much as possible, but how worth it is it for me to do that, knowing that I have to give up my precious workers? And that's another interesting thing too, is that the turn order is super critical in this game. You only have 4 rounds, but by taking, depending on which card you take, you're going to get more or less workers. And I've learned the hard way, getting more workers is better. It can be very, very useful for you to go last in one of the early rounds, the first or second round, just so that you can get 3 workers from the lid. I mean, that is huge. It's a huge difference. Keeping them for the rest of the game can be very, very monumental. And any of the assistant cards that help you get workers back are just a huge bonus. So I think that whole concept of the game of putting more workers out and them being such a vital resource for you is very, very cool. There are some balance issues that I found with the cards. I would say it's probably the biggest problem and issue that I have with the game, especially with the forges. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. There are some forges that have a lot of transmutations that they grant you, like 3 or 4, which is great. And then it's really easy to get the perfect bonus. You might only have to roll 4 or roll one of multiple numbers, 2, 3, or 4. Some stuff like that. Whereas there's other forges that only give you 1 or 2 transmutations and you have to roll a 6 to get perfect. There doesn't seem to be any balance there. And I would also have liked to have seen there be more special abilities and extra stuff that might happen for going to different forges. Like, they all have these cool names, like the Zebra Forge, and there's like the Witch's Brew Forge and stuff like that, but they don't do anything that particularly special. It's just number of transmutations and how easy it is to get the points, and those are unbalanced. So I do have a problem with the Forge deck here. I like all of the whole concept of the assistants is really cool. Some of them are clearly better than others, again, but that's not as big a deal because they always get refreshed. Even in a 3-player game, you at least have 2 to choose from. In a 4-player game, you have 3, which is really cool. And because they're not a limited resource, so when someone takes them, they're immediately replaced. That can lead to a lot of variety and cool things coming out. So I like the whole concept of the assistants, and that you can get this cool bonus, but you do have to pay your precious workers to get it, so it's not a slam dunk. The order cards, that's a neat thing too, although the rules were a bit confusing, but as far as like how you score the bonus points for having the different symbols, that could have been a little bit more clear, but that might have just been something lost in translation. But that works out very cool too. You have different options of what you do. Do you go for something that's very easy but gives you less points, or are you trying to go for the sets of having the different symbols because that could give you extra bonus points at the end? It's a little extra something to strive for. And I'd like the idea of the locations as well, because maybe you don't want to spend the extra workers and try to improve your die rolls to get a perfect bonus there because you don't need that resource. But don't you always need resources? Because you can at least go to a forge and make extra resources, different resources, into elixirs, which are always going to be good. So even though this game is very simple and very light, I think that there is some surprising depth here. I think because it's fast and because it's good for people who are not typically accustomed to these type of games, that it's something that's going to stay in my collection because it's going to have a more universal use than just a very heavy worker placement game that I'm only going to be playing with a few people, or a game that is just way too simple that people just aren't going to be able to get into, or a game like Owlcon, which I reviewed recently, which is also a very simple worker placement, which has this deduction element that some people love and some people don't love. So I do like this game. I think that it's going to, if it ever was to get published in a larger spread, if more and more people were exposed to it, I'd be very interested to see what people think, because I think it's a very neat game. I like the presentation of it, and it's just got some innovative concepts I'd like to see other worker placement games pick up on. My name is Nick. This has been Board Game Brawl, and I'm reminding you to get out there and game every day and in every way. Take care.